The briefing room on the Accord's orbital station above the Veen sovereignty had the functional quality of all briefing rooms. The neutral surfaces, the presentation display, the specific, unhurried lighting of a space designed for the reception of information rather than for comfort. Coordinator Bess Thale stood at the display with the quality of someone who had been maintaining a fragile diplomatic situation for 3 years, and who was, in the briefing, attempting to transfer the weight of that maintenance to the person sitting across the table from her. Irene Voss sat across the table and listened. He was 31 years old and had been doing cultural liaison work for 7 years across 4 civilizations. And the quality that 7 years had built in him was the quality of someone who received briefings the way he received everything, with the complete, pattern-finding attention that was his actual professional gift, which was not the linguistic aptitude his file emphasized, but the simpler and less formally acknowledged quality of paying attention to people, to the specific individuals inside the institutional roles, to the actual terrain rather than the map of the terrain. Coordinator Thale was giving him the map. 17 behavioral protocols for the royal reception, she said. I'll go through each one, take notes if it's useful. She looked at him in the way of someone who had assessed him from his file and who was still forming the live assessment. Some of these are more critical than others. He took notes. He always took notes, not because he needed the notes to remember, but because the act of recording information produced a second pass through the information, and the second pass was where the patterns became visible. The protocols were thorough. Don't speak before being addressed. Don't position yourself above the eye level of the court's senior members. Don't gesture with the left hand in the presence of the Queen's personal guard. Don't accept food before the Queen's table has been served. Don't, and here Thale paused with the specific emphasis of someone returning to something she had already said, and was saying again because the first time was insufficient. Don't, under any circumstances, meet the Queen's gaze directly. The direct gaze is a dominance challenge in Veen culture, she said, or an intimacy claim. The court cannot always determine which, and in the Queen's presence the ambiguity is not tolerated. The last person who met her gaze directly at a formal reception was a Keth trade envoy who did it by accident. The diplomatic incident took 14 months to resolve. What happened to the envoy? Irene asked. Thale looked at him with the quality of someone deciding whether the answer would be useful or counterproductive. He was not harmed, she said. Detained for 3 days while the court determined his intention. Released with a formal censure and a bill for the disruption. A pause. He also apparently could not stop talking about her eyes for approximately 6 months afterward, which his government found professionally embarrassing. Irene wrote this down. He wrote down all 17 protocols with a thorough, pattern-finding attention, and he entered the Veen Royal Court's reception hall the following evening with the 17 protocols active and the specific, patient quality of someone who was present in a new environment and who was watching everything. The hall had the Veen formal aesthetic, austere and precise, the restrained elegance of people who understood that restraint was a more sophisticated statement than abundance. The court was assembled in the specific, layered arrangement of a hierarchical culture conducting a formal occasion. The senior members toward the center, and the peripheral members distributed at the distances their roles prescribed. The ambient sound was the low register of formal conversation, the movement of the court's personnel, the specific, collective quality of a large group of people conducting themselves according to shared behavioral standards. Then the Queen entered. She came through the hall's primary entrance with the composed, unhurried quality of someone who had been the room's center of gravity for long enough that moving through the room had become continuous with her rather than performed by her. She was tall and precise in her movement, and she had the dark hair dressed in the Veen formal style, and her ears curved to soft points through it with the specific, quiet elegance of the Veen physical characteristic that no briefing had fully conveyed, and that the live presence made real. Irene was watching the room. He was watching the room with the pattern-finding attention, the comprehensive peripheral awareness that 7 years had built, and then she crossed his field of vision and he was watching her. He was aware of this. He was aware of the 17th protocol. He kept watching her. She moved through the reception with the composed quality that he had noted from the entrance, the specific movement of a sovereign conducting a formal obligation with precision. And he watched her with the assessment attention that was his professional default, and that was, in this specific instance, not operating in its professional register. There was something in her expression, underneath the composed, institutional quality, underneath the role's surface, that he was trying to categorize, a quality he could not immediately name. The quality of someone for whom the room was a continuous obligation, and who was, somewhere inside the obligation, elsewhere. She had the most unusual eyes he had seen in 7 years across 4 civilizations. The specific, deep color of a sky at the precise moment between late evening and actual dark. Not quite one thing and not quite another. And they had a quality in them that he could not categorize, which was unusual, because categorizing qualities was what he did. He was looking at her. He knew he was looking at her. The 17th protocol was present in his awareness the way that all 17 protocols were present. The information absorbed, the behavioral implication mapped, the response prepared. And then it was not present in the way of something that has moved from the foreground to somewhere else. Somewhere it was still technically present, but was not the thing his attention was on, because his attention was on her. She looked at him. Not a sweep of the room. Not the general awareness of a sovereign being observed. The specific awareness of a specific attention, directed and personal, and it produced in her the slight, involuntary shift of someone encountering something unexpected. Their eyes met. The court went still with the held breath quality of a room that has identified something that requires response, and is not yet certain what the response will be. Irene said, in Veen. His Veen was functional, built over 3 months of intensive preparation, sufficient for formal communication and for the specific register of sincere statement. You are beautiful. He said it the way he said true things, directly, without the management that politeness sometimes applied to true things. He said it because it was what he was thinking, and because the 17 protocols were already gone in the specific way of something that had moved to somewhere that was not the foreground, and because in 7 years of cultural liaison work, he had found that the true thing, said directly, navigated more terrain than the careful thing. The court did not move. The queen looked at him. He saw the moment in her expression, the specific, brief moment when something institutional gave way to something personal. It lasted 3 seconds. It was the most unguarded 3 seconds he had observed in a formal court environment in 7 years of this work. Then Shan Vale, the Queen's senior cultural attaché, stepped forward and said something in the Veen formal register that his functional Veen did not fully parse, but that produced in the court the collective exhale of a room given a framework for an anomalous situation. And the reception continued, and he was asked to wait in an anteroom, and he waited. Shan Vale explained the Vithran in the anteroom with the 12-year protocol quality. The precise, measured delivery of someone who was giving him information he should have had before the reception, and who was managing her feelings about that fact. The direct gaze followed by a statement of personal recognition was, in the Veen cultural framework's oldest register, the gesture of Vithran. The act of seeing a person rather than their role, of acknowledging the individual inside the institution. It was intimate in the way of genuine respect rather than the way of something proprietary. It was, she said, choosing the precise word, what you did when you wanted someone to know you saw them. I didn't know that, Irene said. We know. She looked at him with the 12-year quality. It is apparently more alarming than if you had. What happens now, he said. The court's formal inquiry determines intent, she said. The standard response to a Vithran gesture at a formal reception is a formal review followed by a determination of appropriate institutional response. He looked at the anteroom's carefully considered surfaces. He thought about the 3 seconds of the Queen's expression. And the non-standard response? He said. Shan Vale looked at him with the quality of someone who had been managing protocol for 12 years and who was, in this specific moment, on the edge of the protocol's documented territory. The Queen will see you, she said, privately, which is not standard. He followed her through the corridors with the specific, careful quality of someone moving through a new environment and building the understanding of it as he moved. The private room had a viewport that looked over the sovereignty's capital, the dense, layered architecture of a civilization that had been building in one place for a long time. The Queen was at the viewport when he entered. She turned when the door closed, and she looked at him with the quality from the reception, the something personal and unscripted quality, present now without the court's eyes on it, and therefore less managed. She had changed from the reception's formal dress to something that was still formal, and that was, relative to the reception, a working register. She looked like someone who had decided to be in the room as a person. You did not know about the Vithrin, she said, not a question. No, he said, and yet you looked directly at me and said what you said. Yes, he said. Why, she said. He considered it with the attention the question deserved, which was the attention of someone who understood she was not asking for a diplomatic explanation, but for the actual reason. Because it was true, he said, and because the situation had moved past the point where the careful version was useful. The true version was what was left. She was quiet for a moment. You had been briefed on 17 protocols, she said. The direct gaze was the 17th. Yes, he said, and you. I looked at you and I forgot it, he said. That doesn't happen to me. 7 years and the protocols don't disappear. And then I opened my mouth and said the true thing because the 17th protocol was already gone, and there was nothing left to lose by it. She looked at him with the quality he had been trying to categorize since the reception, and he understood it now, in the private room, more clearly than he had before. It was the quality of someone who had been in a role for long enough that being seen rather than observed was not something that happened, and who was, in this specific encounter, experiencing it. The Vithrin, she said. Do you understand what it means now? Shanvale explained it, he said, seeing the person rather than the role. Yes, she said. I wasn't performing a cultural gesture, he said. I was just looking at you. She was quiet with the quality of someone receiving a true thing and holding it. I know, she said. That is the part the court does not know how to process. The Vithrin performed deliberately is a formal act with a formal response. The Vithrin performed without knowledge of its meaning is. What, he said. She looked at the viewport. She looked at the layered city. She looked at him. It is what the Vithrin was originally, she said, before it became a formal act, before the court built a protocol around it. Coordinator Thale managed the formal inquiry with the specific, tightly wound competence of someone whose entire professional function was exactly this kind of management, and who was doing it under the additional pressure of having told Iren the 17th protocol 3 times. She managed it with precision, and she communicated clearly that she preferred Iren located somewhere that was not the formal management's location for its duration. He spent the 2 days in the sovereignty's cultural archive, which Shanvale arranged with the quality of someone who had decided that the human who had accidentally performed an ancient, intimate respect gesture at a royal reception should understand its history more thoroughly. The archive had 7 centuries of Vithrin documentation. He read it all. The comprehensive, pattern-finding attention applied to 7 centuries of records, the formal documentation and the private accounts, the court records and the journals and the letters, and the personal accounts of individuals who had described the experience of the gesture and its receipt in the specific, unguarded language of private writing. What he found was this: the Vithrin had not begun as a gesture. It had begun as a description. The oldest accounts did not record a tradition performed. They recorded a moment experienced, the specific quality of looking at someone and seeing the person inside the role and being seen in return. The formalization had come later. The court had built a ritual around an experience that resisted formalization by its nature, because the nature of the thing was that it could not be performed into existence. It could only be recognized when it occurred. The formal version was the court's management of something that managed poorly. He closed the archive on the 2nd day and sat with this for a long time. On the 3rd day, Thale told him the inquiry was closed. Cultural unfamiliarity, not deliberate challenge. The Cordvine relationship was intact. She delivered this with the quality of someone who had managed a significant situation to a satisfactory conclusion, and then added with a different quality that the Queen had requested a follow-up cultural exchange meeting through Shanvale's office, which was not standard. When, he said, tomorrow, she said, if you agree. The private room with the viewport, the same layered city outside, Shanvale present for 20 minutes and then, at a gesture from the Queen elsewhere. The Queen looked at him across the room. You read the archive, she said. 7 centuries, he said, the formal documentation and the private accounts. She looked at him with the quality he had been understanding incrementally since the reception. What did you find in the private accounts? She said. He gave her the accurate version. That the original Vithrin was not a gesture, he said. It was a recognition, something that happened when it happened, and that the court built a ritual around because the court needed to manage what it couldn't prevent. He paused, and that the people in the accounts described it the same way across 7 centuries, the same quality, the same specific experience of being seen rather than observed. She was quiet, I understand the experience better after reading the accounts, he said. You understand it from the outside, she said. Yes, he said. I read about it, you have the experience. She looked at him steadily. I have the experience, she said, of being looked at by a human cultural liaison who forgot the 17th protocol, said the true thing, and then spent 2 days in the archive understanding what he had done. A pause. It is not the experience the private accounts describe. It is adjacent to it. Adjacent, he said. The private accounts describe the Vithrin as mutual, she said. The recognition running in both directions. He looked at her. He looked at the viewport and the layered city and the 7 centuries between them and the 3 days since the reception. He looked at Queen Yelvine, who had been in her role long enough that being seen rather than observed was not something that happened to her, and who was looking at him now with the quality of someone conducting an experiment in mutuality. I forgot the 17th protocol, he said, because I was looking at you. That's accurate. Yes, she said. The archive uses a specific term, he said, for the moment before the recognition. The moment when the person becomes visible before the seeing is acknowledged. Vithansale, she said. The moment before the word for it exists, he said. Yes, she said. The room was quiet with the quality of the moment the term described. Outside, the sovereignty's capital continued its layered operations. The inquiry was formally closed. The diplomatic relationship was formally intact. Coordinator Thale was, somewhere in the diplomatic wing, processing the documentation for the cultural exchange, meeting with the quality of someone who understood that the documentation was describing the surface of something the documentation's format could not fully contain. What was in the room was not the surface. What was in the room was what had been in the room since the reception, the true version, the thing underneath the protocols and the formal inquiries, and the institutional management of something that managed poorly by its nature, which was the nature of the Vithrin, and which was, Irene understood, the nature of this. He had forgotten the 17th protocol. He was finding it difficult to consider this a mistake. The Queen was looking at him with the Vithansale quality, the moment before the word for it, and he was looking at her with the same quality, and the political balance between the Accord and the Veen sovereignty was shifting in the specific, incremental way that things shifted when the people at the center of an institutional relationship became, in addition to the institutional relationship, something the institution had not designed a protocol for, something true, which was, as it turned out, where the Vithrin had always begun.